Hello, hello. Welcome to About the Language 1, the present passive infinitive. This is in stage 34, Cambridge Latin course. All right. The wonderful thing about this is you basically already know this because you've seen a bunch of examples of this in all of the stories that we've read so far in stage 34. So I've pulled out a lot of them. Let's take a look at what we have here. Okay. So there's three examples, or really four, because there's two examples in this sentence here from Exitium 1. And if you look at it, notice we got parari, I've highlighted or emboldened that, and archesi. And here we have then kione, ordered, use it. And then remember, lectica is that sort of couch thing that you're the a person, a wealthy patricians, enslaved peoples would carry down the street, carry you on there as a means of transportation. So, for lack of a better term, we're going to call that a litter. Sometimes it's called like a sedan chair or something, but a litter is as good as any. So she ordered the litter parari, and she ordered the slaves archesi. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say she ordered the litter to be prepared and the slaves to be summoned. Okay. For this next one, a fringi. Okay, so this comes from the verb that means to break down. Okay, the basic verb is frango, frangura, fregi, fractus. This is where we get the word fracture. Like if you fracture a bone, it means it's a small break, right? So, but the tribunus, or the tribune, ne pars et Domitia fugarent, so that Paris and Domitia wouldn't get away, might not get away. Use it, so we're using the same verb there, use it, ordered the door, the yanawam, a fringi. So remember, this comes from the verb that means to break down. So what do you think? How do you think we would translate this? Ordered the door. Okay, so to be broken down. All right, let's look at the next example here. So deduci. So this comes from deduco, deducere, deduxi, deductus. Okay, so he ordered Domitia. I almost made this mistakes that a lot of my Latin students do, which is I try to take that first word, even though it's got the accusative ending on it, the M. So he ordered Domitia, and then deduci, and then we know ad alum means to the palace. So how do you think we translate deduci? All right, to be led, or maybe even like led back to the palace. All right, so let's revisit those four verbs again. Okay, here's parari, and we said that meant to be prepared. Okay, here's archesi from the verb archeso, archesera, archesibi, archesitis, to be summoned. All right, a fringo, so there's your verb, like I talked about, a fringo, fringera, fregi, fractus, to be broken down. Oops. Okay, and then deduci, here from deduco, deducere, deduxi, deductus, to be led. Okay, so what principal part, so think about parari, and what principal part do you think that we use to base this form on, this present passive infinitive? Well, that's right. So I've already put this in bold, but the second principal part is the present active infinitive. So the next step here is, well, what do we do to this present active infinitive form, parare, to turn it to parari? Okay, yeah, and to make it passive, we just change this e to an I. Okay, now archeso, archeso. Look at these verbs here. These are all third declension, or excuse me, third conjugation verbs. And for the third conjugation, and this is why your book gives you so many examples of it, it's kind of a weird rule that the rule is that you drop this e and you change it to an I, okay, to make it to be blanked, right? So parare means to prepare, parari means to be prepared. In the third conjugation, it's a slightly different rule. Can you figure out, look at archesera versus archesi, look at a fringera versus a fringi, deducere versus deduci. So what would the rule be just for the third conjugation? Okay, so arcesera, we're going to drop the entire ERE. Now, these are third conjugation verbs. You know this because it's got that short ERE. So what I always like to think is in the third conjugation, we're going to drop 3 letters. Okay, so arcesera, we're going to drop that entire ERE and turn it into an I to make it the passive infinitive. So instead of to summon, arcesera, arcesi, to be summoned. Okay? So this is your basic rule, and this is what your about the language says here. Okay? So notice in the first conjugation, in the second conjugation, in the fourth conjugation. That is not an X. The rule is that we take this E, okay? So are, docere, audire, and we change it to an I. All right, so portare, docere, audire. But in the third conjugation, we're going to drop 3 letters, trahere to trahi. Okay, so we have all of these examples, and I want you to practice this on Buzz, but I also want to point out one more thing, and this is kind of blending two ideas. So remember, just a little bit ago, not very long ago, we learned about deponent verbs. Remember, we learned that we have those. Remember those replicas, right? Those were what we called our perfect active participles. Okay. Well, what we learned later was, well, those replicas are examples of verbs called deponents. Okay. And so just let me write this down. Let's see, what do you remember is the rule about deponents? Like, why are they a thing? Do you remember the rule here? What the deal is with deponents? Okay, deponents. These are verbs that always look passive, but they mean, if I could type, active. Okay, so this is what I mean, right? A regular verb is like amat, and that means he or she or it loves. Okay, and the way that you make that passive is you do amatur, right? So he or she is, or you could say is being loved. All right, now a deponent verb. Here's the problem. There's no such thing as a form like amat, because remember, it is always passive in form. So when you have a verb like I'll use the same first conjugation verb, arbitrator. We know it's a first conjugation because it's got that A, just like amat. Arbitrator. Now this is a passive form, but remember it's deponent. So it means something active. So if the verb means to think, arbitror means to think, what does arbitrator mean? It means he or she thinks, right? Because the form is always passive, but that passive form always means something active, okay? So this is why our replicas, so for instance, we had like replicas, let's take the R from replicas, that was regressus. Well, that looks an awful lot like a perfect passive participle. Well, it's because it is a perfect passive participle, but it's a deponent verb. So it doesn't mean having been blanked, right? Because it's deponent. So it always looks passive, but it means something active. So having returned. All right, so this is why we learned them that way first, but they're called deponents because their form is always passive, but they look like something, or they translate something passive, or something active. Let's try that again. Deponents always look passive, but they mean active. Okay, so let's apply this to our present passive infinitives. Now remember, what we decided is that in the first, second, and and fourth conjugation, we're going to change that E to an I. So portare goes to portari. Docere to doceri. Audire to audiri. The problem child there is the third conjugation, where we're going to drop the entire ERE and change it to an I. All right, now let's take a look here, everybody. We have a bunch of examples from the stories that we've read so far. Olkiski comes from a verb that means to like take vengeance on. All right. So olkiskor, olkiski, oltus. So this is that passive form. This is that present passive infinitive. But we're not going to say to be blanked, right? Because it's active in translation. So Epaphroditus very badly wanted to take vengeance on them. Here's a little bit of a more maybe simple explanation here, or simple example. Progredior means to advance or to go forward. Now, progredi is the present passive infinitive form, but remember it means something active. So it was difficult for them to proceed, to go forward, to go through the streets. Same thing there, progredi. Okay, so what would this mean? Domitia began, what would it mean? Right. To proceed. All right, now what about regredi? Okay, now let's take a look. What would regredi? So regredior means to return, right? It's from the verb that means to return. So what does regredi mean? Domitia decided to return. Ingredi. Do not allow the soldiers. What do you think ingredi means? To enter. Now, a lobby, this comes from the verb elabor, elabi, elapsis. So the verb means to slip out, like to escape, okay? So we will try. What do you think here? To slip out through the black door, to escape through the back door. Now, sequi, from the verb that means to follow, sequor, sequi, secutus. All right. So then with the pyre burning, pira flagrante, a good ablative absolute, he hurried, contended. And what do you think sequi means? Right, to follow. Okay. Now, in every one of these instances, we have the we have the present passive infinitive. But because these are deponent verbs, they mean something active. So progredi means to proceed, regredi to return, ingredi to enter, etc. Okay? Now those, remember, are the exceptions. The basic rule is the present passive infinitive means to be blanked. Okay? So portare to portori, and that means to be carried. Docere to be taught, audire to be heard, and then remember that we have this oddball third conjugation. So trahera, drop the three letters because it's third conjugation, change it to an I, and that means to be dragged. Good luck, everybody.